6 days. That is all it took for a ceasefire that the White House was calling a diplomatic triumph to collapse into missile strikes, a naval blockade, and a 9% spike in global oil prices in a single trading session. If you are watching this and you think the Iran war ended back in the spring, you need to stop and listen. For the next 12 minutes, because what is unfolding right now in the Persian Gulf is more dangerous than anything we saw during the original February strikes, and almost nobody in the Western press is explaining why, we are watching a nuclear-armed standoff assemble itself in real time, built on a broken agreement, a wounded and unseen new leader, and a countdown clock that Washington itself set and is now running out of. Stay with me, because by the end of this you will understand exactly why the next 2 to 4 weeks may decide whether the Middle East tips into a full-scale regional war. Start with the facts on the ground, because they are staggering enough without any embellishment. Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed on the 28th of February when the United States and Israel opened the war with a decapitation strike, an attack that also killed several members of his own family. What followed was a ceasefire, then a memorandum of understanding signed by both governments, and for a few months something resembling a fragile peace. That peace is now gone. On the 13th of July, President Trump formally notified Congress that limited military action against Iran had resumed. Iran responded by striking 2 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz inside Omani waters, killing a crew member, and Washington answered by reactivating its naval blockade of Iranian ports. Within hours, Jordan was shooting down Iranian missiles. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was hitting an air base inside Jordan, Bahrain's air raid sirens were sounding, and Qatar was intercepting an incoming missile of its own. This is not a slow-burning crisis anymore. This is an active shooting war with a ceasefire label still stapled to it out of diplomatic habit. Now, why did the truce actually break? The memorandum both sides signed never resolved the one question that mattered most, which was who controls the Strait of Hormuz. The text only promised Iran's best efforts to allow safe passage for 60 days without a toll, language vague enough that Tehran read it as preserving its own authority over the waterway, while Washington read the same words as a guarantee of a fully open strait once those 60 days elapsed. That gap in interpretation was never going to hold, and it didn't. Traffic through the strait peaked near 50 vessels a day in early July, then collapsed to roughly half that as tensions rose again, and the moment Iran launched a drone strike on a commercial vessel, the United States treated it as a ceasefire violation and resumed bombing. Oman has reportedly drafted a proposal to manage strait traffic as a face-saving middle path, and Iran's foreign minister has been meeting his Omani counterpart directly, alongside quieter contacts running through Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey. Every regional actor with something to lose from a wider war is scrambling to find enough ramp before this spirals further, and that scramble is exactly why some of us still hold out hope that voices of reason prevail before the missiles start flying at a scale nobody can walk back. It is also worth understanding just how far this fighting has already spread beyond the 2 main protagonists, because that is the part most casual viewers are missing entirely. Days before the blockade returned, a US projectile reportedly struck near Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant, an incident that sent smoke rising over fishing boats in Bushehr province and rattled anyone who remembers how close the world came to a radiological incident earlier in this war. Israel, meanwhile, has continued hitting targets in southern Lebanon even as it was supposed to be withdrawing under the terms of its own truce with Hezbollah, and Saudi Arabia and the Houthis in Yemen have effectively abandoned the de facto ceasefire that had been holding along the Red Sea corridor. None of these fronts exist in isolation. Every one of them is tied back to the same underlying contest over who controls the flow of oil and military pressure across the wider region, and every one of them gives hardliners inside Iran's security establishment another argument for treating this as an existential fight rather than a containable dispute. Here is where it gets genuinely strange, and where you need to pay close attention. Iran now has a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, elected by the Assembly of Experts after his father's assassination and now formally the 3rd supreme leader in the history of the Islamic Republic. And yet, weeks into his tenure, he has still not appeared in public, not at his own father's 6-day state funeral across Tehran, Qom and Mashhad, not even at his own wife's funeral, according to Iranian media. Posters of him hang across the capital, but the man behind them remains a rumor. Reporting citing the US Defense Secretary has suggested he was seriously wounded in the same strike that killed his father, potentially with severe facial and leg injuries. Whatever the precise truth of his condition, the practical effect is the same. Iran is entering the most dangerous phase of this confrontation with a leader the public has never heard speak, making decisions from behind a wall of total opacity at exactly the moment the country has to decide how far it is willing to go. That decision now centers on the nuclear file, and this is the part of the story that should worry every government from Brussels to Beijing. In the wake of the renewed American strikes, a spokesperson for the National Security Commission of Iran's parliament publicly floated a set of retaliatory options that would have been unthinkable a year ago: full withdrawal from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, an outright change to Iran's declared nuclear doctrine, and potential action against the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to open a second maritime choke point alongside Hormuz. None of this is yet formal government policy, and Iranian officials continue to insist publicly that they have never sought nuclear weapons. But a bill to exit the NPT was already introduced back in March, and under the treaty's own Article X, a country only needs to give 3 months' notice, along with a statement of the extraordinary events that it says jeopardize its supreme interests, and after that the exit is complete. Given everything that has happened since February, Iran would have no difficulty writing that statement. The nuclear posture of a state that has just watched its capital bombed and its leadership decapitated is not a hypothetical debate anymore. It is sitting on the desk of a Security Council answering to a leader nobody has seen. None of this is coming out of nowhere either. Iran has floated NPT withdrawal as a bargaining chip, going back to the original American exit from the 2015 nuclear deal, and again when unsanctions snapped back into place last year. What is different this time is the context. Those earlier threats were made by a government negotiating from a position of relative security. This one is being made by a government that has literally buried its supreme leader, watched its enrichment facilities go dark to international inspectors since the strikes began, and lost the ability to even verify its own nuclear material to the outside world. The International Atomic Energy Agency itself has said it can no longer confirm the status of Iran's key nuclear sites because inspectors haven't been let back in since the bombing started. That is the kind of information vacuum where worst-case assumptions start driving real policy on every side of this conflict, and it is exactly why a formal NPT exit notice, even a symbolic one, would be treated as a five-alarm event in every Western capital and in Tel Aviv especially. And this is precisely why time now cuts against Washington rather than in its favor. Every option available to the Trump administration gets worse, not better. The longer this drags on, the blockade imposed this week is being enforced far down in the Gulf of Oman rather than inside the strait itself, because no American commander wants a multi-billion-dollar warship anywhere near an Iranian anti-ship missile in those tight waters, and that caution alone tells you how the balance of risk has shifted. Meanwhile, global oil markets are already flashing warnings, with analysts pointing to sustained upward pressure on prices and inflation for as long as the strait stays disrupted, and the United States is burning through its own strategic reserves at a pace that could hit critical thresholds within weeks. A blockade that squeezes an adversary but also squeezes your own economy and your own re-election prospects is not leverage. It is a countdown clock ticking in both directions at once. So what happens next? Nobody outside that small circle around Tehran's Supreme National Security Council knows for certain, and anyone who tells you they have it all figured out is selling you something. But the shape of the possible paths is visible enough. One path runs through Muscat and Doha, through quiet diplomats shuttling proposals on straight traffic and de-escalation, trying to build a version of the memorandum specific enough that both sides can't simply reinterpret it into collapse a second time. The other path runs through further strikes, further tanker attacks, a formal NPT exit notice, and a regional war that could pull in Israel, the Gulf states, and eventually a global economy that is already bracing for oil shocks it has not seen in a generation. What tips it one way or the other may come down to decisions being made right now, this week, by a leadership structure that the outside world can barely see into. That uncertainty is not a talking point. It is the single most important fact about this crisis, and it is why every serious analyst, every intelligence service, and frankly every one of you watching this needs to be paying far closer attention to Tehran than the headlines are currently allowing. If this breakdown helped you understand what is actually happening behind the noise, hit subscribe, because this story is moving fast and I will be back the moment there is a real development to report, whether that is a diplomatic breakthrough out of Oman or the next strike on the Strait of Hormuz. Drop your own read on where this goes in the comments. I read every one of them and share this with anyone who still thinks this war ended in the spring. It didn't. It just went quiet for a while. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.